Hello, today's podcast will be about comeback mechanics in esports. Now, thanks to Thorin, who reminded me that I wanted to talk about this because he recently tweeted about it. And I was like, damn, I've been wanting to make a podcast on this for a while. And his tweet said, comeback mechanics are for children so they don't cry when they play Mario Kart. They have no place in esports. Now, I disagree that they have no place in esports. I think that we have comeback mechanics in all of our beloved esports titles, pretty much, and that they serve to increase the quality of our viewing experience, playing experience, and just they increase the value of the game overall, I would say, and in many senses can maintain the competitive integrity. However, I do agree that the comeback mechanic in Mario Kart is absolutely trash. So the way I would categorize comeback mechanics is in two ways. One, explicit comeback mechanics, and two, organic or natural comeback mechanics. Now, if you guys have any suggestions for better names for these categories, I would welcome those. I would really welcome those because I haven't put a huge amount of thought into the naming process and I'm not great at naming things. But giving you an example of an explicit comeback mechanic, Mario Kart is maybe the best. It's a button that was put into the game by the developers specifically for the scenario of you being terrible at the game, at you being unable to compete amongst your peers, and you then get to press this button, which is available only for you because you're so bad, and that allows you to bypass or circumvent the skill of the players around you, and it gives you, for free, a place ahead of them, which is, in many senses, just cheating. It's what we would consider cheating because you're not really using any tools of the game or any skill sets of the game to get ahead. You're just pressing this button, which is a get ahead button for free. That sucks. That sucks. It's punishing the players that are better than you. And that's just, there's no other way to describe that than it sucks. I believe that Counter-Strike has a great explicit comeback mechanic, for example. And I'm going to explain why. In Counter-Strike, we have a consecutive round loss bonus. So this is up to 5 rounds. It maxes out at 5 rounds at $3,400, and it starts off at $1,400. Every round, you get $500 more incrementally or cumulatively than you did in the previous round for losing. So what we have here is, instead of a get ahead button, we have, here is an opportunity to find a way back into the game. Here is some money that's going to allow you to play some Counter-Strike and get back into the game. Now, it may be that you'll go for a half buy, and maybe with that half buy, you'll be able to get a bomb down and find a way to create more economy for your team. Or maybe, this half buy will allow you to keep your opponent's economy a little bit more honest by allowing you to use some of your skill. Maybe that's team play skill. Maybe it's a flashbang with 2 players that pushed up middle Mirage and you managed to catch this guy off guard. Maybe that you anticipated they were going to play a default and you stacked 2 players towards the B apartments on Mirage and they did a push and got a 2 versus 1 with the pistols, and that numbers advantage somehow gave you a gun and maybe a way to play the round. What we can see here is that we're playing the game, we're getting opportunities to do things in the game, but if the opponent is ahead of you, they're still ahead of you. If the opponent has, let's say, benefited from being ahead, like having a much greater economy, because if it's a 4th round loss bonus, we can assume that they've won 4 rounds in a row, and that means that they have some money to buffer any mishaps that they may have in future rounds. So they're still able to benefit from their success. So nothing necessarily is being taken away from them. Now, there is an argument that sometimes comes in which may make this ambiguous and may give it a bad rap to an extent. And that is the cost of the pistols for how good they are. And I'm not a statistician or a mathematician, and perhaps if you got those guys and put them in a room together, they could perhaps work out and say, specifically actually for cost, pistols like a Deagle, a 5.7, a CZ, maybe these pistols should cost 1.5 times what they cost now. And maybe that's the way that it would make the game more fair because they are too good versus the rifles right now. But that's a different argument, I would say. I think that the comeback mechanic, because it doesn't punish the players ahead and it doesn't lock down their options, it doesn't take options away from the players that are ahead, it doesn't punish them for being ahead. I feel like that makes it a good explicit comeback mechanic. Moving on to what might be my favorite explicit combat mechanic. It's third strike. In third strike, Street Fighter 3 third strike's fighting game, for those of you that aren't familiar, I'm sure though you've all heard of Street Fighter, you get to take this option, a super risky option, which requires an incredible skill. It's ridiculous. Like you have sometimes if it's a red parry, 2/60ths of a second, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think it's 1 frame. I think it's 2 frames to time an attack someone's going to be making before you see them do it, because you can't react visually that quickly. You can't do it. You have to just know it's going to happen. And if you mess it up, what happens is you get absolutely blown up. You'll probably lose a match, because you're probably wanting to do that maybe because you're in a position where you need to take a risk. And so you have this combat mechanic, which means that you have to take on more risk, and it requires a much bigger skill to do it. And that's amazing, because it creates exciting gameplay. It doesn't punish the other player at all for being ahead. It doesn't take away his options at all. It's just exciting to watch. I can't think of any drawbacks to the parry mechanic, and I'm just very sad that we don't see it in other fighting games, because it's just so fun to watch. It's the reason why everyone loves third strike. It's a mystery to me why we haven't really seen it past that. Obviously, one of the reasons arguably is because it's less casual user friendly, and that's the reason why we get this one push buttons like in Overwatch. An ultimate is your ultimate meter's been charging up. Now you've got this one, you press this button, it will just kill everyone type deal. But that can harm competitive integrity to some extent, depending on how the game has been designed around those abilities. So moving into 2 titles which I think have incredible organic or natural combat mechanics, it would be Quake World and StarCraft, the 2 granddaddies of esports. Both games, I believe, came out in 96, if memory serves me. And I think Brood War was 98, and I think StarCraft was 96. I may have messed it up, but it's close enough. And the same with Quake, I think 96 as well. And Quake was also the first 3D, like the actual proper 3D engine, in none of this like 2D, 2.5D thing where you have sprites and stuff. You're running around in Doom and everything's sprites. It's kind of 3D. No, it's an actual proper 3D engine, the first one that ever existed. And the Half-Life 1 engine was built from that, and the Source engine was built from that. And we still play on this engine now, effectively, if you want to be nerds about it. Anyway, I digress. A nice bit of trivia there, but I digress. So StarCraft Brood War has an amazing combat mechanic because the game has an enormous multitasking demand. It's very, very clunky to anyone these days because there's no multi-building selection. You have to put all your production buildings in one spot because the way that you macro in that game is you bind a location. So and it has to be an F key. So it's F1 through 4. So for example, you would bind F3 to a bunch of barracks. And so that means you want to fit all the barracks on that particular screen. You have 1 through 0 to bind keys to for like 12 units. Groups of units that comprise of only 12 units per group. And so that means you go through 1 to 0 pretty damn quickly. And when you get to 200 supply, things start to get difficult to manage. And so what happens is, because you're having, if you're the player that's ahead, you're going to have more bases, more economy, more units, more abilities to be using, more areas on the map to check. You got to go to every base and make sure that the SCVs you're building are mining. You got to make sure the upgrades are going. You got to do all kinds of crazy stuff. This means that the player that's ahead has more multitasking to do. And so what it means is that because in Brood War also, units are very strong. They're very, very strong. And because controlling 2 groups of units is much easier than controlling 4 or 5 groups of units, there is another element that can pay off for the player that's behind on supply or economy, because they actually have the ability to, with these very powerful units, have better tactical control, better positioning, better timing. The way that they engage is more precise. Now, a player that made this very famous was Savior. If you want to look up articles, there's some really good old articles on Savior. They're on Wikipedia, basically explaining how Savior was so incredible tactically that it created all these situations where economically it didn't matter so much in that era of StarCraft, and he was able to circumvent what would be horrible imbalances for his race on particular maps, and would have a high win rate against everyone because tactically he was so strong. And that's the combat mechanic, is that because the units are so strong, they can be used tactically very well. And if you're playing against someone that is having to multitask much more than you, then that's a very natural combat mechanic, because he can't be quite as good tactically. If he does, he sacrifices something elsewhere and loses that advantage that he has in economy. And you have this tug of war effect where this guy will have more units to throw at you, but you will have better tactical control of the units that you have. Now, of course, it doesn't always work out this way, because it really comes down to the skill of the players. But at the very high level, you get the most incredibly exciting games, in large part because of this. And it's one of the reasons why Brutal is special in many people's hearts. The Quake World 4 versus 4 example is very hard to explain. There is a video of me at a QuakeCon where I was explaining this. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I can't remember offhand, but it was maybe like a couple of years ago. And either way, Quake World has this mechanic where, again, weapons are very, very strong. And so there is a weapon called the lightning gun. And if you're in a body of water with a lightning gun and you shoot it when it has ammo in it, it basically kills the entire room. It's like an AoE effect. You don't have to even aim at anybody. It just kills everyone who's in sight, who has line of sight to you. That's all you really need, is line of sight and enough ammo. And it's a one-click kill. So the crazy thing about that is it sounds really gimmicky. It sounds like, oh, this is like an explicit combat mechanic, because there's one button that's put next to the game. Obviously, it wasn't an explicit combat mechanic just because they didn't even know esports existed or competitive play existed when they made any of this stuff. But the way it works out in Quake World is that weapons are so strong that it gives you the opportunity to have weapons, and it prevents the other team from who's doing very, very well, except under extreme circumstances. It prevents them from having control of the weapons. So you always have a way to play the game. You're not just respawning constantly. You're always able to pick up the weapons. Now, it's really hard after the point in which you pick up these weapons. And in this example I'm using, is, if those who know, I'm talking about the map specifically, DM3, where there is the weapons room, where the rocket launcher and the lightning gun are both in the same room. And so to have control of that room, you risk getting discharged if you want to attack it, that is, as a team that's in control. And all the things that you want that can keep you in control and keep you winning the match are on the other side of the map, and areas that aren't in that area of the map. So it's kind of well designed in that way, although it's completely by accident. But anyway, this is a really cool idea, again, because it goes back to this idea before. What do we want to do? We don't want to punish the players that are ahead. We want to give a fair chance to the players that are behind to get into the game and play the game. And in this example, they get weapons, but they don't get armors. They got to work for that. They don't get to get rid of the opponent's power-up control. They have to work for that. They don't get to take armors for free. They have to work for that. They have to use their team play. They have to use these powerful guns that they have collected or have been able to collect. So it gives you a chance back into the game, even though things really, really suck. There is a chance, opportunities to play the game still. I think that's very important. One of the reasons, and I can cap this podcast off by talking about Quake 3. Quake 3 is a game that didn't really have any combat mechanics at all. There was no combat mechanics. The only combat mechanic is being better than your opponents. And Quake 3 just had this thing where, like, if you just had to be good enough to know how to not let things snowball, because if things snowball, that's it for you. It's just it for you. You're just not going to be able to recover. And that's kind of what you have to have in a game which doesn't have any combat mechanics. You have to have other mitigating factors that can allow a player to not be in a snowball situation, but to still at the same time not punish the other player for being a lot better than you. And then that's a very difficult thing to think about, I must say. But that's been today's discussion on combat mechanics. I hope you guys have had some interesting thoughts about it. I love talking about these topics. I think it's really interesting, and we don't really ever talk about them. So if you would like to leave me some comments about combat mechanics, ideas for podcasts like this, I would love to read them. So thank you very much for the support, and I'll see you on the next podcast.